Welcome to this episode of the Real Sports Science Podcast, episode 44, and our volume number 2 in the summer series 2023. And we have another guest on. We got Jamie Lowry, another graduate of the SNC Masters at Loughborough 2021, I believe, or 2021. So a year senior to Matt. And now works at Wellington College as the S&C coach, or better like as the athletic development. Is it still called a coach, or it's just athletic development lead? The athletic development lead. We are the Real Sports Science Podcast. This is episode 43. Let's go. Jamie, welcome. Really excited to have you on.
Hey Dave, how you doing? I'm really excited to be here. Thank you for letting me.
Right, so we got to start off the podcast. Jamie, an absolute legend, coming on the podcast on his birthday.
Well, you know,
big happy birthday to Jamie Lowry. That's a first, having a guest on the show on his birthday.
Yeah, thank you guys. What's a better way to start your birthday than talking about sports science?
I don't know. Yeah. Starting the day with sports science talk doesn't get much better than that.
Exactly right. It's only down from here.
Jamie, tell us a little bit about yourself for the yeah. Hopefully not.
No, I'm kidding.
Jamie, tell us a little bit about yourself, kind of where you've come from, maybe a bit about academic background, what you're doing now, what you do in your free time. Start there.
Yeah, cool. So, at the moment, I'm the head strength and conditioning coach at Wellington College. It's a independent school in Berkshire, down south, kind of near Reading, in between Reading and London. Outside of that, my academic background is I did my undergrad and postgrad at Loughborough Uni. My undergrad was in sports science. My master's was in strength and conditioning, which I believe was the same as Matt. And then in my spare time, at the moment, I'm actually on a bit of a down phase, but for the last 6 months, to semi-finals twice, which is kind of the step before the CrossFit Games, and on a team, should specify. Last year, we did quants. I've been pretty full on with competing with CrossFit. Compete sort of at a reasonably high level. Been qualified, but there was a bit of a controversy with a teammate failing a drugs test. This year, we were just shy, but third time's the charm for next year. A lot of my energy's gone into that. Outside of that, I've really just been spending time with family and sorting out the little things and trying to keep on top with work and keep things sort of a bit tight and knit. Not doing too much more.
Just one, because we could probably talk about CrossFit this entire podcast, especially your last 2 seasons and kind of the up and downs that's been.
Yeah.
What I'm interested, what did you learn maybe about yourself in especially going through the last 2 years of competing, of getting to the CrossFit Games or qualifying for that, and then having what happened have happened, and then as well as this year of going for it again, having a good shot, just not being able to make it on that weekend? What have you learned about yourself in terms of training, or just how you work through things in those, because of those 2 things?
So I think to clarify what happened as well, year 1 we qualified for the CrossFit Games, and a teammate, the other male, failed his drug test. We got that info about 3 weeks before we were about to fly out. Obviously, no one else on the team knew about it, and it came as a big shock, and it was a big letdown because we couldn't go. Obviously, he's now serving a ban. We're not in contact, haven't been since. But yeah, that sucked. And then this year we had a great team. We just ended up having a bit of a nightmare on 1 or 2 events and came a couple spots shy of qualifying. What I learned, I'd say, in the first year, it was very much like, am I here as a fill-in? Am I actually good enough? And I think the answer to that was yes. And then so that sort of put this year in a really good place to train. And I think once you've actually done something and you qualified for something, there's kind of a snowball effect of, oh, you can do this and things get better. I think you see that with other athletes in the space of, an individual athlete might qualify for their first games and then go on to qualify for 3 more. just because it kind of elevates you. Um,
Mm.
I think on top of that, it sort of taught me a bit more about myself and how to train, what to focus on. How teams a bit different to individuals, so how to be of more use on a team, um, and then just working with others. Like did team sports as a kid, but then for various reasons, kind of stuck to individual sports. So having to actually put myself back into that team environment where it's obviously it's still an individual sport, it's still fitness at the end of the day, but you've really got to work together and you actually got to rely on other people and people have got to rely on you. So it taught me a lot more about working as a team again, which is nice and actually I think one of the more enjoyable aspects of CrossFit.
So even though in the first year when you did qualify and weren't able to go, that even for you kind of confirmed that, hey, we weren't able to go, but I'm good enough to get there.
Yeah, man.
So let's do it again.
Exactly. It sucked and it really hurt in the moment, but I think you can only move forward from things like that, and not to. I don't want to badmouth the other male that failed his drug test, although we don't exactly have a good relationship. But he was the weaker part of the team coming into the competition that we then qualified for the games at, and having qualified with him, I know he would depending just to the side of what he was taking, but the fact that we qualified with him was say, okay, if we had another male who was even better, we could do way better. Was a sort of a nice boost to take from a bad situation. But yeah, I think it also matured you a little bit as an athlete. Like my competing this year, although we didn't qualify, and that was for various other reasons to do with events people struggle with on the team and certain skills that were hard for certain athletes. I think it helped me perform much better. I think my actual approach to the semi-finals this year was a lot more mature, a lot less erratic, and I think I was a lot calmer, had a much cooler head, and it overall went smoother.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. I mean, I was watching you guys in Berlin, really hoping that you'd be able to get there, and looking forward to what happens next year.
Thanks, man.
That's for sure. Here's a question: SNC CrossFit.
Yeah.
I was making my breakfast this morning and thought of this question. Do you think SNC coaches can train somebody for CrossFit, or is that totally different? Or is it like a good SNC coach could make a good CrossFit coach?
Look, I think 100%. I think it depends on your biases coming in. I think there was a big thing for a long time where there was kind of it's SNC or it's CrossFit divide, and kind of like SNC really didn't like CrossFit because of how it maybe pushed the boundaries on certain parts of maybe the interference effect or other scientific principles that we'd been taught were, set in stone. I think, look, if you're an open-minded CrossFit coach or you're an open-minded SNC coach, you can be good at the other. You ultimately just have to do the training for the athlete in front of you and not for your own beliefs, really. SNC for CrossFit can be quite hard, but equally, there's a lot of things going on, so it can be quite fun. You can try a lot of things. You can do a lot of things. I think when I was very lucky to intern with British Swimming, it was amazing, but it was a lot simpler in that they were elite athletes. Don't hurt them. They do the same thing pretty much every week and the same process leading up to a competition. CrossFit can be a bit crazier than that, so it does take a bit more sitting down and breaking it apart. But yeah, in SNC, there's no reason why a good SNC coach couldn't be a good CrossFit coach.
That's interesting that you said like it's as the SNC coach. It was like, don't hurt them. I think Matt, you've mentioned that as well, especially in like team sports as well. Like there's the two, like in season and out of season, and you were saying some SNC coaches in season, it's like don't hurt them, and then some SNC coaches like no, actually we're gonna keep going after it. Matt, you're talking about that as well.
I was saying, I think it all depends on how, what sort of base that person's got. Obviously, if they're youth athletic development, I think it's a lot harder because they'll be having so much stimulus from across all different sports. If they've got PE along with their main sport that they're playing, along with all the other academic stress. But if they say let's just say if they're in the international setup for rugby, you can still push them because they would have had that strong base. Their body would have been used to it over time, so they can still sort of keep pushing during an in season. Not push to obviously great extents, but there's still within a boundary that they can still be pushing on to.
So you both did the S&C Masters at Loughborough. So I'd be interested to hear from both of your perspectives the biggest learning that you took out of that going into the jobs that you are now or looking for jobs after. So maybe we'll start with Jamie, and then maybe Matt, if you can answer that question after.
Yeah, so the biggest takeaway I had from my Masters coming into Wellington, I think, honestly, is the experiences of working with different specific groups and how to apply that forward to who you're working with. So coming into a school, I think you have to take the science and the really niche things that you do with elite athletes really don't matter as much as more as getting people engaged, and maybe the more soft side of coaching that is part and parcel with school. The students and athletes I work with now, they're teenagers, and pretty much you could do anything and they'd probably improve because most of them are beginners. So it allows a lot more freedom to try things, which is very nice. And I think, coming from my Masters as well, that just taking the initiative to try different things and see if they work or don't and how to adapt them was a big thing. And I think it was very useful. We got to do lots of practical stuff, even during the COVID year that was our Masters. But that was very useful coming into where we are now. I'd be interested to hear what Matt's experiences are.
I found like Loughborough is a great place to be exposed to such different environments, and essentially, it's such elite environments in a way that every time you're walking out, you're seeing some S&C coach train a tennis player differently towards a swimmer, and then you get the chance to actually be on a placement where either you're in charge of a program yourself, or you're following a performance and actual S&C coach around, and you can just badger them with a bunch of questions. So with that, it exposes you to different things. It puts you in your sort of gets you out of your comfort zone whilst also learning the theoretical stuff. So you're getting a chance to learn the stuff in the lecture and learn all that theory and then put it in a practical setting almost. And then once you get out into the real world, I remember like my first job, I thought, okay, crap. There's a whole different side of S&C, which is the actual coaching, but I've been exposed to that. I've been exposed to meeting all these different athletes that are at a high level. So sort of that shock factor got taken away from me, and I was able to see, I was able to adjust and adapt a whole lot quicker with that experience at Loughborough than without if I never actually went there in the first place and just tried to find a job straight out of it. So I think it's that adaptability that Loughborough has helped me on massively.
Right. So we've got a bit of a topic today. I think Jamie, you put something about this on your story one day.
I did indeed.
And Matt and I have teased with the idea of actually talking about this as well. So I was like, oh, nice. Let's talk to Jamie about it as an S&C coach. And the idea of active recovery. And I guess, and whether that's like active recovery after a bout of high intense exercise to recover for the next intense exercise, or like for glycogen stores, or if it's like active recovery on your rest day to help like with DOMs and energy levels and stuff like that, which is obviously a bit more of a gray area. Yes. So I guess maybe we'll throw it to Jamie to see what you think. And maybe we'll break it up if it's like rest day active recovery for that. Obviously that's a little bit difficult, more gray area, or like glycogen storage. Just like tell us your thoughts behind that. I don't know if you can remember what you were thinking when you posted the story, but just give us your thoughts on that, and then we'll take it from there.
Yeah, I think it's a very sort of hot topic that is very there's sort of minimally conclusive evidence when you look at the data. what is active recovery is a good question, really. What's the right procedure to do? What's the right intensity to work at, and so forth. I think a lot of people use active recovery in their programming, but maybe don't use it with the intention in mind other than just doing some extra cardio, or it tends to be cardio, right? And I think it sort of raises a question of, like, is it actually better than just passive recovery, just sitting around doing nothing, or lying down on your rest day? And there's sort of two sides to the coin as well. Of, a good aerobic system, good aerobic fitness is in and of itself going to help recovery in the long term. So you probably have to break down your active recovery sessions to a short-term focus or a long-term focus, and the differences between the two. I think, to sort of jump ahead from the studies I've seen and read, it's very mixed and seems very inconclusive, or at least the conclusions and the things they've tested don't necessarily link to performance outcomes in many studies. So you've got some studies that show that active recovery is better, some that passive is better, some that there's no differences. But most of these are testing on sort of molecular differences rather than actual outcome differences. So we don't really know too much. But what we do know is that over the long term, that aerobic fitness is going to help you recover, especially with sort of things like PCR assistant replenishment and the muscle glycogen. But I think it is quite confusing, and the post I saw was really cool because it did try and break down the fact that there's two sides: the actual sessions themselves and the long-term aerobic benefits of doing some low-intensity Zone 2 style work. What are your thoughts on active recovery, David and Matt?
Yeah, it is really interesting. And I think what you said about people not knowing why they're doing active recovery is a good point. I think a lot of it does come down to to education of, like, hang on, what are you doing and why are you doing it? Like, know why you're doing it. Yeah. I was reading some papers about glycogen stores. Yeah. Realizing that, like, okay, well, there's, like I was saying, active recovery for rest days or for glycogen stores. And it was like you said, kind of mixed results, but it actually seemed that, like, passive recovery worked better for increasing glycogen stores after, like, an intense bout of exercise. So that's interesting. Yeah. The other interesting thing was that there was, like, actual fiber type difference. So, like, at a whole muscle level, glycogen decreased during active recovery. But if you looked at fiber types, type 1 fibers deplenished glycogen stores, but actually type 2 fibers were able to replenish glycogen stores during active recovery. So it almost comes down to, like, okay, well, knowing what kind of muscles or what kind of power output you need, what kind of muscles are you trying to actually restore the glycogen to? Yeah. Are they more type 2 heavy? Are they type 1 heavy? So I found that really interesting. Yeah. The other interesting thing I found is that lactate, because I think a big thing of, like, active recovery, especially after intermittent exercise, is the idea of, like, flushing out lactate. Yeah. And that's kind of like a buzzword that's been thrown around for years. Yeah. And they did find that active recovery did actually decrease lactate, but the interesting thing there is, like, well, that could be just because, like, you're working on your aerobic systems. Yeah. And when glycogen is being used, like, lactate is being broken down. So, like, of course it's going to decrease because it's getting broken down into, like, hydrogen and NADH, which like isn't great. So is lactate actually, like, in recovery sense, a good measure of, like, quantifying recovery level? Yeah. So I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, and I think it just highlights when you're talking about lactate there, that one of the issues with a lot of the studies is this focus on things like lactate or muscle glycogen, when actually when you're taking that, if we're talking here about an actual session and the recovery bouts between your intervals, the best measure of is active recovery probably working is actually just the performance outcome. I think that's the gold standard. I think you can get really bogged into some of the details that maybe don't tell the whole picture. They are important, don't get me wrong, but I think we should treat, when we're looking at these studies, I think some of the confusion is that a lot of them don't actually test performance outcomes in the forthcoming test. So if you're doing one interval compared to the next, the most important thing about active recovery or passive recovery is what was the outcome, right? It's still very important to understand why, but I think a lot of the studies look at that, and that's maybe where some of the confusion comes from.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. I guess the difficulty with that one is like, because performance is so multifactorial,
Mhm.
that maybe the second one is better or worse simply because, I don't know, maybe they weren't as motivated or people weren't shouting at them as
Yeah.
much. But that's such a good point. Like, at the end of the day, if we're in a performance environment, performance is ultimately the key. I guess then a step back from that, all you're trying to do is like, okay, how do you put the body in the best possible position to give you the best chance at good performance, is I guess kind of the way I look at it.
Yeah.
Like, realizing that, yeah, there's so many other things other than just this one measure that's going to influence performance.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't think of that.
Well, I think as well, you look at, I think it just helps to separate the confusion with so many studies saying one thing and saying another, and ultimately being just such a mixed bag of evidence. I've got one study here that showed that, heart rate variables and body temperature improved with active recovery, and therefore active recovery is better than passive. And then you've got the next that says passive recovery is better because of various other performance measures. And that one did actually test subsequent performance in a test, which was good. But I think you've got to be careful when you're actually testing the thing that you want to know. And I think ultimately with all of these conflicting pieces of evidence, it sort of suggests that really it's not going to hurt. It might not help for the reason you think. If you're an athlete that likes it, you probably can do it, and it's probably not going to do anything bad. I think also approaching your training in a more long-term approach is a good idea. I think depending on who you are, but hey, look, even for some of your more power-based stuff, having a good aerobic base is going to help you recover across the long term. So for a lot of athletes, I think doing some sort of low intensity, maybe zones 2 style training throughout the week, just to improve aerobic fitness, and that's not going to take away from your sport or particularly tire you out, is probably quite useful. Will the active recovery work for the reasons you're thinking it is? Maybe not. But I definitely think having a slightly stronger aerobic base for pretty much everyone, probably powerlifters too, is probably useful in some regard in terms of then making your actual training sessions better, making the intra-set recovery better, and so forth. What do you think?
No, I was just saying, like, yeah, it's a very key thing you said there, because a lot of S&C as S&C coaches, we can get lost in finding what current research has said, seeing what the evidence says in order to give our we're working literally for the benefit of our athletes or the people, our clients, or whatever sort of industry in S&C you're in. We're working for them with the sole purpose of making them better and the best they can possibly be. So we're obviously trying to keep up to current research, trying to keep up to current training modalities to give them that opportunity. And sometimes we can be a bit too lost. And one thing I've been sort of exposed to here is, working at a school or working with the rugby boys in the UK, I'm trying to introduce them to so many different things, because I'm like, oh, this is actually quite interesting. You guys could do this. Oh, one other person's got an issue. Oh, I found this on this study. Oh, but this study goes against it, or and then I've come here and I've realised actually the boys know what they're doing. They can literally get on with it in the sense that they know what works for them almost. And I think that, tell me if I'm wrong, Jamie, but I feel like you were saying that earlier. If it works for them, then at the end of the day, if there's conflicting studies, just go with what works for them and what they're happy with, as long as it's not doing any damage. Having a good aerobic base is, unless they're a pure power athlete, have an aerobic base isn't going to hurt them at the end of the day.
Basically, he was agreeing, saying that, often, well, as an S&C coach, you're working for the pure benefit of whoever you're working for, obviously, and often you can get kind of bogged down in evidence of like, oh, maybe you could do this, maybe you could do that, and something that Matt's learned as he's been in New Zealand with Waikato Chiefs is that, like, the boys, they know what they're doing, and sometimes, like, less is more. And he said, and I quote, Jamie, tell me if I'm wrong, but what you were saying there is, like, if it, in some things, especially when there's conflicting evidence, like some papers say yes, some papers say no, and this population and that population, that, like, if it works for you and it makes you feel good, then do it, and then we can kind of see how we can maybe modify that a little bit depending on what the literature says or what it doesn't. But at the end of the day, especially in the gray area, it's like, if it works for you and it makes you feel good and it makes you feel like you have better sessions.
Yeah, for sure. And I just try and sort of highlight to the athletes I work with at schools, because they have questions about everything. Like, I remember being a 15, 16, 17-year-old kid, and you kind of want to, you have every question about every supplement, every question about every training program. And I think I just try and highlight and say that, say in the context of active recovery, it's not going to be magic. It's not going to suddenly fix your DOMs. That's going to take time. It's not going to do, it might not do much. It might just make you feel better. But yeah, again, if you like it, do it, but it's not your saving grace, or it's not this one super thing you should put on a pedestal. It's just a tool you can use. I just had a good point, but I'll remember that in a sec. And so I think it is very useful to have your athlete in mind.
The worst thing you want to do is, in those grey areas, you don't want to say, no, don't do what you're doing is wrong. I saw on this paper that blah, blah, blah. So, like, say, I saw on this paper that in swimmers and football players, that won't work, but he's a rugby player and he's been doing it for 3 years and he's reached the highest level of performance. And then they stop doing it because you're adamant that doesn't work. And then it throws them completely off their game. Maybe that's an exaggeration, but, like, it just takes something out of them. Do you know what I mean? Like, you've hindered their ritual or their sort of, yeah.
Yeah, no, exactly. You need to make sure your athletes are doing what they think is going to work in as much of an evidence-based way as possible, but equally making sure they understand that if they're doing this, they might like it and it might not hurt them, but it might not be magic too. And just so they can inform themselves as they go further into their training journey or their athletic journey.
We had a guest a couple weeks ago who was saying, we were talking about psychology and that aspect of performance. And he said, and we were asking him basically, like, is that something you do? Like, how is that for you? Blah, blah, blah. And he basically said, look, like, I get some people need that, and it probably helps a lot of people. For me, I don't want to do it because I feel like somebody might tell me, like, you should work on this, and I would have never thought of that as a problem until you've told me that it could be a problem. So, like, kind of like, don't fix what's not broken. If the change may or also may not help. So it was an interesting take on it.
No, for sure, and I 100% agree with that. I think as well, this probably has to come from your athlete first, right? If your athlete comes to you with, hey, look, I really like doing a 40-minute bike ride with my friend on a Thursday because that's my active recovery day. Can I still do that? And it's like, well, yeah, it's probably going to be fine as long as you don't kill yourself. But yeah, equally, if an athlete comes to you and they just take a rest day and they've never heard of active recovery, don't suddenly force them to do something that's not their part of their routine. I did quickly remember what I was going to say, actually. One thing with active recovery and your athletes in general, and I think it's useful for teenage population that I work with and Matt works with now, that teenagers tend to cotton on to ideas being like, oh, I've got to do this now, then it's going to help me. And one thing active recovery can do is, at least I found this as well, is sort of promote a false sense of you're ready to train hard again. So one thing you do have to be careful with, I found from sort of more anecdotal experience, is that, it's almost like a big warm up. Is you can do something, a bout of active recovery, and think, oh, I'm ready to hit a session. I can do one now. And you just have to be aware that recovery for certain things does take time, and you shouldn't use active recovery to sort of mask that and make yourself feel better and ready to go sooner than you need to. I don't know what you think about that.
That leads perfectly into kind of what I wanted to talk about just to end it off. And that is the fact of how much do you think, and this is going a bit away maybe from athletic population, but again, maybe not. How much active recovery do you think gets labeled as active recovery just because people don't want to rest and they want to be able to add in like another zone 2, like aerobic based session and call it active recovery? And that kind of goes to what you're saying of like, they do active recovery and it's like, oh yeah, let's hit a session, And it's like, you're not resting. Like, this is your rest day. You're not resting. Now you're just like throwing in a steady state cardio bout. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there's a fine line between that.
Yeah.
I think.
And I'd say as well, like, look, it depends who you are as an athlete. If you're a recreational trainer and you just really like exercise, knock yourself out, but just know you might make your recovery worse by doing that. If you're an athlete who competes in a sport and it's part of your routine, go for it. Just be careful. And then also that understanding again of the short term versus long run effects. If it's part of a good program, I think a lot of athletes who have an aerobic part to their game, so most team sports, CrossFit especially, but then even like your power athletes who need to recover between sets or between races, you probably should be doing some easy steady state stuff throughout the week anyway. So it should be part of your program. And if you feel the need to add it in on a rest day, you suppose you got to ask yourself, am I doing this just because I'm sort of semi-addicted to training and I love that feeling, or am I doing this because it's part of my program?
That is we caught what you were saying there. Cool. Yeah, so that's great. Sorry for all of the difficulties.
That's all right.
It makes it more difficult to be able to go back and forth, and it's really too bad because it's been great chatting with you. I think we'll leave it there for now because you got a birthday breakfast to go to.
This is true.
So we don't want to keep you away from that as exciting as this is.
Ooh, I'm feeling pancakes today, breakfast.
Yeah. Pancakes is always a good shout.
Nah, just the regular pancakes. Old unhealthy ones.
Helps recovery, I read a study about.
Yeah. Exactly.
Jamie, thank you so much for jumping on. It would be amazing once Matt's back if we can do something in person. We can expand on what you and Matt were talking about there with kind of athletic development, especially in youth. That'd be fantastic. So we'll definitely have to be in touch with that. But we really appreciate you coming on, especially on the morning of your birthday, fighting through the technical difficulties. But I don't know, hopefully you've gotten something out of it. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. I know I've really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed talking to you.
Yeah, it's great to speak to you guys.
Yeah,
and thank you for having me on. We'll definitely have to do an in-person one. I'll have to come up to Loughborough soon and see you, David, and we'll get something rolling.
Yeah.
That would be really cool. Actually, that would be really cool.
I have no idea what that is, but I'll come along.
There you go. Sweet. Yeah, unlucky, David. Just because you two are musicians doesn't mean Jamie and I can get on about something else.
We've ended it, and it's working perfectly now.
How funny. Oh, man. Guys, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jamie. Have a fantastic birthday.
Cheers. Have a good day, guys. See you later.
All right. Talk to you soon.